2011 through 2018 Audi A6 3.0 turbo quattro rear brake pads and rotor replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the rear brakes. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you the part numbers for the brake pads and rotors that we're going to be using. I will link them all up in the description of the video. So this vehicle has electronic park brakes and it requires a scan tool to put them in service mode. You're not going to be able to do this on the generic side of the scan tool. You need to go on the manufacturer side of the scan tool. So you need to enter the VIN number into the tool and it'll pull up all the information for the vehicle. So you can do this with all different types of scan tools, VAGCOM, Snap-on, like I'm using here, the All-Tail. I like the All-Tail because it has a hot button function that allows me to quickly do it. So once you get all the information entered into the scan tool, you just go into the hot button here, you just press it, and it kind of walks you through the steps. So as you can see here, it has a function right here. I press the electronic park brake, and then you just follow the prompts on the screen. It'll walk you pretty much through what to do. So you're going to press the button, and it's going to tell you to make sure that the park brake is off. In the clip here, I accidentally turned it on, so I turned it back off. So I had the vehicle in neutral and it's already racked up, so I went ahead and made sure the park brake is off by spinning the wheel, and then I just follow the prompts on the scan tool here. And if you listen when you press the button, you can hear the little motors inside here actuating, so you can hear the pulling the park brake back into the service mode. So it takes about 10 seconds for it to retract the brake pads back into the caliper, or the park brake back into the caliper. Once it's pulled back all the way, we're going to go back inside the vehicle and we're going to shut the ignition off. It will stay in the service mode until we turn it back on with the scan tool. And I'll show you how to do that at the end of the video. So now we can get the vehicle jacked up. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and go ahead and remove the two rear wheels. So now we're going to unbolt the caliper here. It requires a 13 millimeter either a socket or a wrench. So I'm using a ratcheting wrench here, and once I crack the bolt free, if you look right here, this jam nut on the inside here is spinning. So it requires us to back it up with a wrench, but there's not a lot of space in there, so it requires a thin wrench that fits in between here. If you try to use a regular 15 millimeter wrench, here is what the size is. If you try to use a regular wrench, it won't fit on the fastener here. So it requires a thin wrench. So I'll link up a set of thin wrenches in the description of the video. So go ahead and back it up, and then you can take the top and bottom bolt for the caliper off. So now I have the bolts removed. I got a flat blade screwdriver that's stuck in between the caliper, and I just kind of pried the pads, or the caliper, inwards, and that allowed me to free the caliper from the bracket here. Then I just set it up on top of the suspension. So now we're going to unbolt the caliper bracket here. It has 18 millimeter heads on the bolts here, so you can use a ratchet like I'm using here. You want to use something with some length on it because it has quite a bit of torque on these bolts. They're torqued down to about 140 foot-pounds, so there's quite a bit of torque on them. And go ahead and crack the top and bottom bolt here free. Once you get the bolts removed, you can go ahead and slide the caliper off, bracket off like this and set aside. Now we're going to remove the rotor. There's a T30 Torx bolt right here. It's not held on with very much torque. You can do it by hand with a little ratchet, or use like a power tool like I'm using here. So once you get the screw or bolt removed, most likely the rotors will not come off easily. So what I like to do is I take a lug nut and I spin it back in a few threads. Then I'm going to grab a hammer and kind of give it a whack from behind. Just a couple good whacks, and the lug nut will keep it from flying off and landing on your feet. Now that it's loose, you can go ahead and remove the lug nut and go ahead and remove the rotor. And now we're going to clean this hub up here. So in a lot of places, there's a lot of rust that builds up on these hubs. And if it does, it requires you to clean this up. That way the new rotor fits flush on there. I just use a roll-off and a die grinder. If you don't have a tool like this, you can use a wire brush and just clean the hub up until it's nice and clean so the rotor fits on flush. Now you can go ahead and take your new rotor and you can go ahead and slip it on. Go ahead and bolt it up with the set screw also. Now we need to prep the caliper bracket here. The brake pads come with new hardware, so we're going to change all that out. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the old brake pads from the caliper bracket here. Just go ahead and pull those out, set those aside. Then we're going to peel off the hardware here. The stainless steel clips, just pull them off with your finger. Now you can take a wire brush and you can clean up where the stainless steel hardware went. You know, look for any pitting or anything like that. If there's any rust buildup, you want to get that all cleaned off. If it's in bad shape, I also recommend that you consider replacing it. And then after that, we're going to pull the slide pins out. So you're going to pull these little boots here, and you kind of just push the boots back. Now you can pull the slide pins out like this. And what we're going to do is make sure that these are all cleaned up. So in sliding freely back and forth, this vehicle is fairly new and the slide pins are sliding pretty good. But we're going to go ahead and wipe all that off, and we're going to clean this out. You can spray brake clean inside here if you need to and clean it out. I'm just going to put a little bit of fresh grease on these. I'm going to wipe off the old grease and then put a little fresh grease on the ends here. And then I'm going to work the grease onto the slide pins. Then I'll insert them back in the boot, and I'll just work them back and forth and make sure that that grease is in there and that they're sliding nice and freely. And I'll do that for both of them. You don't want to use just any type of grease. You want to use grease that's specifically designed for working with brakes. I will link up with the stuff I use in the description of the video. It's called Seal Glide. And also most brake pads will come with a little pack of the grease with it. So now that you got that all cleaned up, we're going to get our new hardware kit here out of the brake pads box. And we're going to take these new stainless steel clips and we're going to place them onto the caliper brackets here. They just press on with your fingers. So you just line them up the way they came off, and once you got them lined up, you just press them in with your fingers. Now that you got all your hardware mounted onto the bracket here, we're going to go ahead and reinstall this onto the spindle that slips over the rotor here. So we're going to slip it on over the rotor, and then we're going to bolt the two bolts in the back here. So when we go to bolt these up, if you notice, one bolt is longer than the other one. The top bolt is the longer bolt, so you'll slide that in, and you'll start the bottom bolt here. Now you can go ahead and run these bolts in and tighten them up. And once they're tightened up, we're going to torque them down to 140 foot-pounds. Now that the bracket's torqued down, we're going to go ahead and install our new pads. So you're just going to slide them into position, the front and the rear. Then I'll put a little thin layer of grease on the back of the shims on the brake pads here. I just use my finger and just kind of rub it in. If you notice, I didn't put the grease on the hardware, and that's because the grease will collect dirt and prevent the pads from sliding back and forth. Also, if some of the brake pads come with a pack of it, you can use that as well. And you're just going to put a real thin layer on the backing of the shims here, and this will help prevent squeaks and vibrations. When you're doing this, you want to be careful not to get the grease on the front of the pad or on the rotor itself. That can actually cause squeaks. So now I'm going to make sure that the piston is pushed back into the bore of the caliper here. You also want to make sure that the piston looks in good shape. The rubber boots and stuff are not torn or no fluids are leaking in it. And I'm just using a brake caliper tool here. It kind of works like a cocking gun. You put it in between it, and as you cock the handle, it spreads the pad out and presses the piston back into the bore. Also, if you notice, I did not open any bleeder screws when I'm doing this. I'm just pushing the piston back in, and that's pushing the fluid back up into the master cylinder. And later on, I'll show you how to get a nice firm pedal. Also, when you're putting the inner pad in here, it has a little notch that's notched out. You want to make sure that goes on the inside here. That's where the pad wear sensor will go. So in some vehicles, there's a pad lining sensor on both left and right side. This particular one only had it on the driver's side, so I will show you that in a minute. So now we're just going to slip the caliper back over the bracket here in the new brake pads. So you have to make sure that the brake hose here gets routes a certain way, and when you pull it up, it kind of gets snagged on things. So you just make sure the brake hose is routed right, and then you can slip it over the bracket like this. Once you get it over the bracket, we're going to start the two bolts. Now the bolts, I like to put what they call thread locker on those. So this is like a little glue that prevents these bolts from vibrating loose and coming back off. I will link this up in the description of the video. And also the top and bottom bolts are different. So you want to make sure when you take those out, you want to keep track of which one went on top and which one went on bottom. So go ahead and start these two bolts here and torque these down. So you're going to run them in until they're snug, and you're going to have to use the thin wrench to back them up when you go to tighten these up. So go ahead and tighten the top and bottom bolt down. Then you can go ahead and switch over to your torque wrench, and you can torque these down to 35 foot-pounds, top and bottom. And like I said, you're going to have to use your thin wrench to back them up and hold the jam nut in the back from rotating as you torque these down. So in some models, they have the pad wear sensor on both the left and right caliper. This one only has it on the driver's side one. So this brake is pretty much done. So we're going to go over to the opposite side. The process is the same, except you'll have a pad wear indicator here, and you're going to need to unplug that. To do that, you're going to squeeze the little tab here. Actually, you're going to push inwards and then squeeze the little tab right here. And once you get it squeezed in and pull this little tab back, Then this electrical connector will come off like this. Now we need to get the connector out of the bracket. So to do that, there's a little tab right here. You need to push that in, and once you get that pushed in, then you're gonna give this little connector here a twist, and it'll twist up. Once you get it twisted like this, then you can slide it off to the side like that and remove it from the bracket. And then when you go back in, the only thing you're going to do is you're going to press the new sensor into the slot right here on the pad, the inner pad, until it fully seats. And then you're going to pull the cable around here. You're going to put the brake bleeder holder here over and secure that. And then this right here, you're going to line it up with the ear upwards, and then you're going to slide it in. So you'll line it up with the bracket, slide it in, and you're going to rotate it until that little clip clips into that little hole right there. So you'll rotate it around until it clips. Now you can take the electrical connector and slip it on and press it until it clicks and doesn't come back off. Now we're ready to take the car and take it out of service mode. So we're going to turn the ignition switch back on. And now on the scan tool, it was already previously hooked up. All you have to do is press OK, and it takes you out of the service mode. It automatically does it for you. On some other ones, it may require you to push a button or go follow a few prompts to get it to disengage. So now the caliper is back into the regular mode. Now you can go ahead and pump the brake pedal and make sure that the brake pedal is nice and firm. You can also operate the park brake on and off, make sure that works fine. When you go on your test drive with the, when you hit the brakes the first couple times, it's gonna sound like it's metal to metal. That's normal. That's that coating that's on the rotors wearing off. So make sure you test drive it long enough before you give it back to your customers so that it wears that stuff off. So I will link up all the parts and tools I use in the video in the description. I'm Brian Essa from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.